What I want to talk to you about is a particular project that my nonprofit organization, Epidemic Answers, has been developing for a number of years. And in order for me to do that, I need to set the stage a little and just take the temperature of where we are in terms of our understanding. I think if I go too close here, I might get a little feedback. So that we can get an understanding of where we are today and this moment in time in with regard to our children's health. So many of you have probably heard the statistic that about 54% of American kids have some kind of diagnosed chronic health condition. So if you think about that for a minute, just a few decades ago, let's go back as far as the 1960s, you had less than 10% of American kids with a diagnosed chronic health condition, and today we're 1 in 2 kids. And what's interesting about that is that that's kids who have a diagnosis. And as you know, not every child out there is diagnosed, but there's many, many children who have chronic health conditions. They have chronic symptoms that maybe don't quite fit in a diagnostic box. But the message here is our kids are sick. And I use the term sick in the broadest sense of the term, right? That's not just that they have, really bad asthma and they're hospitalized all the time for it, but there's a lot of mental health issues, psychiatric diagnoses. The kids are anxious, they're moody, they have depression. There's so much stuff going on with our kids, and it's not something that has been around for a long time. This is new. And you can look at any one of the categories, like whatever your category of interest is, you're going to see growth. And this is kind of a low growth curve. This is looking at the rates of ADHD and the rates of increased diagnosis over the last couple of decades. But it doesn't look that scary, except for it's 1 in 7 boys. Well, that's kind of scary. But when you look at the curve like this, it doesn't look that scary. But what the curve really should look like is like this. Right? Because if you go back before the 90s, before the 80s, before we started really tracking this in meaningful ways, there really weren't that many kids who had the symptoms that look like ADD or ADHD. And then you have some diagnoses, like type 2 diabetes, that didn't exist at all in kids. So type 2 diabetes is an adult disorder, right? That was an adult onset. And now we're looking at kids in their, like as young as 9 and 10, then tweens and teens that are being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at a very concerning rate. And this is the diagnosis. I could probably spend an hour just showing you charts of all the different trends and what we're seeing in kids' health, but this is the one that I'm most concerned about. Why? Because we didn't used to have autism. And I know there's a lot of talk out there in books, and people are saying, well, we've always had autism, we just didn't call it autism, and it's just part of the neurodiversity spectrum, which is partly true, but what I'm talking about is the modern form of autism, which is now affecting 1 in 36 kids in the United States. Okay, when I started this work about a decade ago, it affected 1 in 10 children, 1 in 110 children, and now we're at 1 in 36 children with an autism spectrum diagnosis. And while that is a spectrum of conditions, there are children who are more high functioning, who do fine in school, who have friends but have some quirkiness to them or have certain sensory issues or aspects of their autism. But there's a whole lot of kids that are nonverbal, that are low functioning, who are not able to use the toilet, who will never live independently. And that's an autism I want to make sure we're all thinking about and are aware, because we are having an autism epidemic, and there are many, many families that are impacted by this that have no resources to be able to care for their children while they're children, let alone into adulthood. One of the other things I want to mention about the autism epidemic is the United States is the leader in the autism epidemic. We are leading the charge. Other developed nations like South Korea, Australia, the UK, they're all seeing it too, but not like us. We are leading the charge. But I will also say it has made its way into almost every corner of the globe. I was in Calcutta, India in January, and I was at an autism conference there. And I thought, surely in Calcutta, India, there won't be autism because it's kind of a US man-made modern living condition kind of diagnosis. Nope, autism is skyrocketing even in Calcutta, India. So it's really a global epidemic. So you can look at all the different rates of the diagnoses that are taking off, but the thing that's super concerning is that there are the vast majority of kids that are impacted in some way or another. So even kids that are healthy are not healthy. So if you go to, you know, any playground and you look around and the kids are running and they're vibrant and they look like they're healthy and you're like, wow, childhood's so great. I wish I could be a kid again. What you're not seeing is sort of the chronic health symptoms that are kept at home behind closed doors, and people are so closed with what's going on with their kids, either out of, you know, confusion or shame, or they're not getting the help they need. But the kinds of things you're seeing in kids today without a diagnosis are chronic constipation, chronic diarrhea, chronic skin issues like eczema, anxiety, depression. So all these things that maybe they're not getting a diagnosis for, but they are all impacted. I think one of the easiest ways to see this is if you go into Facebook and you start looking at some of the parenting groups. I threw a couple up here just for fun, just to show you kind of what's going on out there. Parents are starting to get together to talk about their kids' health issues because they're lost and confused, and it wasn't there when they were growing up, right? Here's an example. There's this one at the top. I don't know if you can read this. Parents against Miralax. You all know what your Miralax is? Miralax is a over-the-counter medication you can take for constipation, and it'll clear you out. It'll help you poop. And it's given to kids. Like, you go to the pediatrician, my child hasn't pooped in a week, what do? Just give them some Miralax, it'll be fine. But there are kids that are living on Miralax chronically because they can't poop. And that is a sign that something's up with their health. Something's really wrong with their gastrointestinal health. 32,000 members in this group, Parents Against Miralax, because what's happening is these kids are so constipated due to a variety of things that have happened to them. They are living on Miralax, and then they're getting sicker and sicker and sicker. The Miralax is destroying their microbiome, it's destroying their gut, and it is not a healthy way to be. And so actually there's talk about class action lawsuits against Miralax, and Miralax is just one of the many over-the-counter and prescription pharmaceutical things that are doing damage to our kids right now. But my point is just to illustrate that these parents are coming together because they don't know what else to do. The 16,000 members in the baby and childhood eczema support group, 144,000 people love this site GoGen, anxiety relief for kids. And if you can read some of the things that are posted down here, are some of the parents' descriptions of what their kids go through: anger, aggressive meltdowns, hurting himself, trying to break things. Extreme constipation will hold it up for a week and a half and has been hospitalized for it. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that parents are living through, but when you go to school and you see the other parents there, they're not talking about it necessarily there, so you may not see it. So when I say even healthy kids are not healthy, it's because we're not aware of what it means to be healthy anymore. I have this friend who, her name is Kim Screen, and she's kind of a blogger. She writes for medium.com, and she wrote this spectacular blog. I highly recommend you go Google it later. Its title is "Are Your Kids Healthy But Not Really?" And I'm just gonna read a little snippet of what Kim says here, because I think she just nails it, like what's going on. She says, "Like most moms, I spend a lot of time making sure my kids are healthy, but over the past 2.5 years, I realized something important. My kids are healthy, but not really. Actually, they are part of a new group of kids I'm calling healthy unhealthy. And I think this may be the new normal, which is deeply concerning to me." And Kim goes on, "My kids are healthy. Look at these super cute pictures of them here. They look healthy and happy and active and awesome, because honestly, they are all of that. They are doing well in school, they are social, they are creative, they're growing like weeds. And at the same time, my kids are unhealthy. Collectively, they have food sensitivities, anxiety, distractibility, visual perception issues, sensory issues, ADHD-like symptoms, and a severe speech delay called apraxia that is going to take years of therapy to hopefully correct. My not-so-healthy 4-year-old is learning to use his talker to speak, and this feels very normal. I know many other moms with their own version of this healthy, unhealthy story, and it turns out this is the new normal." I could not say it better myself. Like, I really think she articulated this experience that moms and dads are having today with their kids. So I want us to really think about this in the collective, right? There's a lot of individual people suffering, a lot of individual kids impacted, but as a society, we are going to be crushed by this if we don't start addressing it right now. If you just think about the economic impact alone, every year, we spend $500 billion, the US does, on these 6 conditions. And this is on managing these conditions. This isn't finding a cure, this isn't preventing, this is basically paying for hospitalizations, for pharmaceutical medications to manage the symptoms of these conditions. $500 billion every year. Imagine what we could do with that money if we put it somewhere else. So we're already feeling the pain financially of this, right? And then the special education costs, I feel like this is the place where we're really gonna start to buckle, is because in each community, everybody's starting to feel the pinch of the increasing number of kids that need a one-on-one aid, that need extra support, that have an IEP, all these educational supports that weren't there. And while yes, we're doing a much better job actually identifying individual kids' needs and supporting them, and we should, we also just have more kids who have these specialized needs. And I think that that's going to be where we're going to really start feeling the pinch. And you can see here in this graph, it's federal grants to states for special education. You cannot deny that this is happening in real time to people and communities all over. So I have to wonder, if this is what we're dealing with today, what's it going to look like in 20 years? So the adults, the kids that are right on that cusp of adulthood, they're not doing well. Right now we have about 1 in 2 college-age kids, young adults, who have basically could qualify to have a psychiatric diagnosis. They may or may not be diagnosed, but they could qualify to have a psychiatric diagnosis. They are feeling that anxiety, that depression, suicide ideations is not uncommon in this group of kids. And then the obesity epidemic is really hitting us hard right now. So we have 42% of teens who are between the ages of 16 and 19 that are either overweight or obese. 42%! So if you think about that trend, that's something that just ticks up. Where are we going to be in 20 years? Are we going to have anybody who's not overweight or obese? And of course, this has a national security implication as well. There was a report that came out a number of years ago by a couple of retired generals and admirals, and the report was called Too Fat to Fight. That was literally what it was called. But the military is starting to analyze the population of new recruits coming up. And they're finding that there just are not enough healthy kids, young adults, that are going to be able to fill the ranks of the military. In a subsequent report, they found out 71% of Americans aged 17 to 24 do not meet the criteria for eligibility to serve in the military. Just think about that. 29% are all we have to pick from. Okay? That is a very concerning statistic.
Could you just hit the last slide for 1 minute, please?
You bet. And if anybody wants these slides later, I can email them to you. Just come by me. So we have a problem, don't we? Big problem. Yes. One of the things about this problem, though, is we're not seeing it for what it is. I think sometimes we tend to look through our own lens, like my child has ADHD, so I see that problem, or my child has a life-threatening food allergy, and that's all I can think about because she may die if she drinks milk. Like, I get that. Like, we're in our kind of silos and our lenses. And so even, as a society, we tend to say, well, we have, small number of children with autism. We have a little bit, more with ADHD. We got a lot of kids with allergies, but that's manageable. So we're kind of dealing with these epidemics in their own little silos, right? So it's kind of hitting below the threshold of our awareness. The magnitude of the problem it's not resting in our consciousness yet. But if you add all these things up, and that's what that's meant to illustrate on the right there, if you add each of these things up and take it collectively, we are way over the threshold of awareness. If we just start calling it what it is, which is an epidemic of chronic health conditions in our kids. By the way, it's not just kids, but I think our kids are most acutely impacted. They're much sicker than previous generations. So we really have to start talking about this as one epidemic, right? And once we start talking about this as one epidemic, you begin to actually find solutions and answers. Why? Because if you take any one of these conditions, whether it's autism, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis, whether it's asthma, any of these conditions, and you look at what's going on under the surface, what physiologically is imbalanced in these kids, it's kind of the same across the board. Right? You can find very common physiological imbalances in a child with asthma and a child with autism. So what are some of those things? This is just a very small list, but you can basically do blood tests, urine tests. There's other kinds of ways that you can take measurements to see what might be the root causes of the symptoms. So here's an example. If you have a child with ADHD and you do a stool test, and then you take a child with type 2 diabetes and you do a stool test, you're going to find, but both of those kids have a decreased diversity of microbes in their gastrointestinal tract. And that's going to look less diverse than a child who's not expressing any health symptoms. Okay, so decreased diversity of microbiome, the healthy germs in and around your body, and especially in your gastrointestinal tract, that's a really important indicator of health. Okay, so if you go down the list, inflammation. We think of something like ADHD or depression or anxiety or autism like psychiatric diagnoses, mental health disorders. Well, the brain is actually connected to the body, right? And what's going on in the brain may be a function of the health of the cells in the body. And what's going on in the cells in the body, we are seeing enormous markers of inflammation in any of these conditions. So autism, these kids are on fire. Extremely high levels of inflammation that you can measure and track. And the list goes on. Toxicity, you can measure these things. It's 2019, we have the most amazing lab tests. And you can see that all of these kids with the diagnoses, as compared to the healthier controls, they have toxicity, they have inflammation, they have dysregulated immune systems. Their immune systems are overactive, underactive. They have nutrient depletion. They don't have enough omega-3s. They don't have enough zinc. They don't have enough magnesium across the board. Now, it's not the same for every kid. One child with ADHD may have low zinc, and a child with autism may have low zinc, low magnesium, low omega-3s, reduced antioxidant status. So it'll be bio-individual, but the point is that all of our kids are showing signs of being physiologically imbalanced. So once we start thinking about it that way, that all of these kids have sort of root causes that are the same, but that result in slightly different expressions of symptoms, we can start actually identifying the real root causes of these conditions. Okay, so that's what this root structure is supposed to illustrate, is that there are root causes. I don't know how many of you were told that autism is genetic. And all the money in autism right now in research is going into genes. There's 230 genes that are implicated in autism. Well, there's 230 genes that are implicated in depression and Parkinson's and anxiety. It's not about just the genes. Genes are, of course, important. But it's an interaction between genes and the environment. So what is in our environment that is making our kids so sick? What is it? Is there a thing? The answer is it's many, 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 many things. Okay? So that's what this illustration is meant to show here, is that it is living in the modern world, being exposed to many things, and having many experiences that the human body is not adapted to. Because this is a little bit, I'm going to get a little bit into what Katie was talking about earlier. Okay, but let's just take one example. Remember I was talking about decreased diversity? Yep.
PPI. Is that PPI?
PPI is a proton pump inhibitor, which I will use that as an example, actually, since you brought it up. PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, reflux medications like Prevacid and Prilosec, along with antibiotics and some other kinds of very commonly used medications, are actually one of the factors that's contributing to microbiome depletion, to the destruction of the microbes in and around our body. And I don't know how many of you are young parents and around babies, but a phenomenon that's commonly seen in babies these days is reflux. They're calling it reflux, where the baby spits up after it drinks formula or after it breastfeeds. And so the doctor puts them on a PPI, a proton pump inhibitor, okay? Proton pump inhibitor, it suppresses the acid production in the stomach. If you suppress the acid in your stomach, what happens? You can't digest your food. And then it becomes a vicious cycle of microbiome digestion, nutrient extraction issues. But it is a major feature of modern American infanthood, is that babies are getting antibiotics for every ear infection and every viral. We don't give antibiotics for viruses, but this is becoming so common. So when I'm talking about we have the same root causes, that's an example. Okay, you have a child who has autism and a child who has asthma. Both of them had a PPI when they were babies. Okay, and the reason why one developed autism and one developed asthma is because of the other factors that played into their early years or prenatally, or I'm going to get into a little bit of that complexity in a minute. So what I'm trying to describe here is that our kids are sick because of the cumulative and a synergistic impact of modern living. Sounds kind of simple, right? It's not, though. I mean, it's super complex. If you want to know what's at the root cause of your particular child's issue, you have to go back and look at your own health history. You have to look at prenatal history. You have to look at your child's early years. You have to look at what they're eating today, what they're doing, what their daily activities are. But this is a way of talking about the problem, is that our kids are sick because of the total load of things that are influencing their health. And I'm going to talk about total load in a different way. If you think about it this way, this is an analogy I use very often, which is that you think of your body as a barrel, right? And your barrel has a capacity. And if you think about all the things in modern life that might be stressors to the body, and I use the term stressor in the most broad sense, like what Katie was talking about with lack of movement, that would be a stressor, right? Or the wrong kind of movement maybe would be a stressor. And then environmental toxins, infections, electromagnetic radiation exposure. Sugar is a major stressor in the modern American child's diet, but we think it's what kids do. They eat lollipops. It's just a birthday cupcake. That is a stressor on the body. Metals, artificial light. I mean, there's so many things, right? This is just illustrative. There's many, many things. And if you think of each one of these things as a little drop that goes into the barrel, what happens to the barrel if you keep putting drops in? It overflows, right? And when we have the overflow from the barrel, that's symptom expression. That's when you start seeing diagnoses and symptoms with our kids. So the encouraging part of this is that you can actually change the size and strength of your barrel by adding health supports in. Okay, so what are health supports? Health supports would be sleep. They would be eating nutritious food that's organic, that doesn't have any pesticides on it. It would be getting natural sunlight, going outside in the sunlight without sunscreen, which I don't know many people that actually do that anymore, but that's a health support. It's clean water, clean air, relationships, spiritual beliefs. These are all things, I'm not making this up, these are all things that modern science has definitively shown are health supports. So you can kind of begin thinking about health in this ratio of supports to stressors, right? Because the more supports you put in, the bigger your barrel gets and the more stressors you can tolerate. Okay, but if you have tiny little itty bitty barrels because you're not sleeping enough, you're not getting enough nutrient dense food, you're not seeing natural sunlight, you're not touching the earth, you're not going to be able to tolerate a lot of stressors. And I would argue that our kids are completely overwhelmed. Their total load is too big and they don't have big enough barrels because our culture doesn't believe in these things. Yes, microbial friends. That example is like Katie was talking about gardening. You go out and you dig in the dirt, you're breathing in all those microbes, you're getting them on your skin, assuming that this is dirt that's, you know, rich in the things it's supposed to be in and not like glyphosate dirt or, you know, pesticide dirt. But microbial friends is embracing natural exposure to germs and microbes. You know, eating a carrot right out of the dirt. That's exposing yourself to our microbial friends. It's this understanding that we live in symbiosis. with the microbes on the planet, and we have such germ phobia. You know, we sanitize everything, and we don't want our kids to touch anything that's dirty because we're afraid of the microbes. So Microbial Friends is embracing the microbes and knowing and understanding that we need them to survive. And in the microbiome, which again is all the microbes in and around your body, that is probably one of the most important things that we need to maintain good health, is a diversity of microbes in our gut. They're important for regulating your immune system. They help you detoxify. They help you extract nutrients from your food. And yet, we're destroying our microbiomes. So that's what I mean by microbial friends. The more diversity we have, the more robust our health is going to be. So this is going to sound familiar to you, because this is what Katie Moman was just talking about, is that our way of living today in 2019 is a total mismatch for the way that our bodies evolved over millennia, right? We did not evolve to eat the foods we're eating right now. Like, it's such a short period of time that we have shifted into this way of living that is so foreign to the human body and to the human experience on this planet. So part of what you're seeing with this whole stressor support dynamic is that we just are maladapted to the modern world. Our bodies do not know how to survive or thrive in this environment. And it makes total sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you think about an animal, we're animals of sorts. If you think about an animal in its natural habitat, like think about this elephant. Doesn't it look so healthy and robust? And it's probably got a little group of elephant friends over there on the other side of the picture you can't see. You know, they're social animals. This is an animal in its natural habitat. And it is thriving, right? Do you see a lot of stressors in this picture? But then, this is an elephant who is not in its natural habitat, right? I mean, just think about this. I don't know what this elephant is eating. I know he's inside. I know he's got some fluorescent lights in there. You can kind of see that, right? This elephant does not look well. He is maladapted to his current environment. It's a mismatch, just like Katie was talking about. And he's also chained up. And he doesn't have any elephant friends. They're social creatures, right? So why is it any different for us, right? I mean, if we evolved over millions of years like this is how human beings lived. This guy's barefoot. He's out in the sun. I'm pretty sure he's not wearing any sunscreen. I could be wrong. Unless it's a little zinc oxide on his body. I don't know. But this is how we evolved. Yet, this is how we are living, right? I mean, it's such a mismatch for how the human body evolved. And it's even worse for our kids, because our cultural norms have put an enormous total load on our kids' bodies, and they are completely feeling the pain of that mismatch right now. I mean, these are just a couple of pictures, right? Like I was talking about the sugar. Sugar is a cultural norm. It's your birthday, let's have birthday cake and birthday sugar and candy, and Halloween. Halloween is like stuff your face with sugar. Like all the things that are so fun, that we love, that are part of human culture today, American culture in particular, are so bad for our bodies. But, you know, we don't even think about it because it's our culture. It's what we do. It's what our mama fed us. It's what we were taught. So it's really hard to extract yourself out of that culture. You know, and there's these other things that are really only like 15 years old, right? We're taking our babies and we put them in baby carriers and we carry them around in their little strollers. And this was a point that Katie was talking about earlier, is the importance to movement. And babies are supposed to move. Their brain development is dependent upon them moving their bodies in ways that human babies are supposed to move. They're supposed to out and explore their environment. I am not judging any of these parents. I am saying, wake up, people. We are living in a way that is totally incompatible with human biology. So my question is, this kid looks healthy, right? Like, I mean, aside from the like potential mouth breathing problem, which is I could give an entire talk on that issue alone. But like, he looks typical, let's say. Maybe not healthy, he looks typical, right? What do we eat for breakfast? We eat cereal. He's, mom's at work, dad's at work, and I'm just on my computer eating my cereal. We're good. Like, he's probably functioning in school. He might even be an A student, okay? This feels so normal, doesn't it? This is like our cultural norm. But why is this kid any different from this? Yeah. Right? So what's happening here at this moment in time with this epidemic of chronic illnesses in our kids is that our kids, our mismatch biology, they're screaming for us to pay attention to that mismatch. It's begging for our attention. And all it would come down to would be shifting our awareness to the choices we're making every single day. So our kids are screaming, their bodies are screaming. Our future is totally uncertain at this moment. And are we listening? Are we paying attention? So I came to this awareness totally ignorant, completely blind to any of this going on until about 10 years ago when I became a parent. And I looked around at all these kids, and everybody's kids seemed to have something, right? And I had this like mind-blowing awakening moment being like, this is not right. So I started listening, right? I started listening to the parents who had impacted kids. And I heard a lot of bad stories about, kids struggling and diagnosis and this medication and this doctor and a lot of that. That was a lot of my experience as a young parent. And then I started listening to something else. I started hearing something else, kind of like some signal in the noise, right? And you know what that was? It was stories about kids who actually got better, who were sick and got better. I started hearing stories about parents who were listening to their kids' mismatched biology. And they did think to themselves, something is not right here. It was not like this when I was growing up. And so they started looking at their child's environment. They started looking at what their child was eating every day. They started looking at the underlying physiology of what was going on with their kids. So I started writing down and documenting the stories of these kids who had autism and then didn't, who had rheumatoid arthritis and then didn't, because their parents were listening to their mismatched biology and started making different choices. So what this slide is depicting, and on the Epidemic Answers website, you can go on epidemicanswers.org, and there's a catalog of stories of families who have done some work and healed their kids. But these stories are anomalies, right? So if you have a child and you get diagnosed with autism tomorrow, you'll go to your pediatrician or developmental pediatrician and they will say, you're like, what? There's no autism in my family. Why does my child have autism? I don't get it. You're overwhelmed. And the doctor will say, I'm very sorry. It's probably genetic, but I don't have it in my family. It's probably genetic. There's nothing you can do. You might want to start planning for your child's future. He might need to be institutionalized. I mean, these are the kinds of things that you hear. 99% of kids out there get a diagnosis, do not improve. They manage their symptoms. That's what chronic illness is. You manage your symptoms. But there's these anomalies out there. There's these outliers. Like, does that mean anything? Is that meaningful that there's a couple random kids that got rid of their diagnosis? If 99%, it's like most of the time it doesn't happen. So I want to share a few anomaly stories with you. This is anomaly number 1. It's a boy named Aiden who was diagnosed with autism at 2 years old. He was nonverbal, had seizures, pretty severe seizures. That's what you can see in this picture here as he's hooked up to an QEEG machine. Apraxia, self-injurious behaviors. Just think about that for a second, you guys. These are our kids. They shouldn't be hurting themselves. That's a flag that something's going on with them physiologically. And they went the route that they were supposed to go, right? You go do ABA, you do OT, that's what you're told to do. ABA is applied behavioral analysis. It tries to get you to modify your behavior. I think of ABA as kind of like if you have a colander and your goal is to get some pasta to curl nicely in the colander. ABA is like taking the colander and taking dry pasta and trying to get it to stick in the colander. Okay, so it's not looking at kind of the root causes or like a way to work on the underneath problem. It's a way of modifying behavior. So they did that and that didn't help. So then Aiden's mother basically got educated, learned about all the things in her son's environment that might be impacting him. And I use the environment in the broadest sense of the term. What he's eating, what was going on the skin, where they were in their environment, were they inside, were they outside, all those kinds of things. She learned a different kind of detoxification technique. And she worked really intensively with him for a number of years. And by the time Aiden was 6, he lost his diagnosis. And this kid is not a kid anymore. He's in his 20s and he's out in the world crushing it, having a great life. But he was nonverbal with debilitating seizures. Here's anomaly number 2. This is Leo. Leo was also diagnosed with autism at age 2 by the Yale University Child Study Center. I'm pretty sure they didn't make a mistake in his diagnosis. Some people will say that, well, maybe they didn't have autism to begin with, but these are valid diagnoses. He had stimming behavior, social and communication impairment, sensory integration disorder, perseverance, low frustration point, and he was physically unwell. He had asthma, he had chronic diarrhea, he had allergies. And that's one of the things that happens oftentimes with kids with autism is they think that all those other things are secondary to autism, as if the autism, whatever that genetic autism thing is causing all of these health issues, as opposed to thinking that their body might be unwell and so maybe their brain is responding to an unwell body. They did a number of interventions, including a gluten-free, casein-free diet, tailored organic diet. They took out all the pesticides from their diet, got rid of allergens in their food and sensitivities, also did some detoxification therapies and a number of other things. And this mom is somebody who's really in tune with nature. She's an energy healer and she is so into her child and really in tune. And they had tremendous success. By the time he was 5, he had totally lost his diagnosis. He's a college student now, again, crushing it at life, because they figured it out early on. And you might be asking yourself right now, I just shared you 2 stories of kids who had autism who their families got on it early, right? So is there a window? You have to do it by the time before they're 5 or it doesn't happen. And while it isn't as common, it does happen. And this is anomaly number 3. This is Harrison. So Harrison was diagnosed with PDD-NOS, which stands for pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which is on the autism spectrum. At age 3, he was nonverbal, socially withdrawn. His stimming was severe, and then when he did finally acquire language, he had pretty severe echolalia. So I don't know if you know what echolalia is. It's when you repeat words. So if I had echolalia and somebody said, there's an apple over there, then I would say, there's an apple over there. That light is too bright, that light is too bright. It's repeating. Sometimes it goes along with scripting, which is repeating movie phrases, very common on autism. So they heard about this gluten-free, casein-free diet. They're like, we're gonna try that. But that's all they really did. And it didn't work. And I hear this all the time. I tried the gluten-free, casein-free diet. Well, there was more that needed to be done. So they gave up, kind of just didn't really do that. They did ABA and OT and they got him along. He managed and he got into school and he managed. But his autism symptoms didn't go away. And then finally, when he was about 15 years old, the family found a functional medicine doctor. Does everybody know what functional medicine is? It's a kind of medicine that looks at root causes, do a lot of lab tests, checks your nutrient status, and really looks at trying to figure out the puzzle of what's going on underneath symptoms. So they found this functional medicine doctor in Wisconsin, and they started working intensively on diet, on cleaning up his environment, on detoxification. And this was when he was 15. They started this when he was 15. In 2 years, he had totally lost his diagnosis. His physician said he was in remission. Okay, so it can happen later. It can happen with somebody who's starting at 15. And actually, there's many stories of adults who've recovered their chronic conditions. How many of you have heard of Terry Walls, who's a professor who reversed her MS? It happens. There's a great book, by the way, and another MS story came out just a couple weeks ago called Beat Autoimmune, about another adult who reversed her MS, which I encourage you to check out. So what do we do with all this? There's so many anomalies. Do they matter? These are some additional stories you can find on the Documenting Hope website, documentinghope.com. These are stories who've recovered from other kinds of things. I know I'm focusing on autism because that's really the most complex of the conditions. So if we can reverse autism, surely we can reverse asthma and a life-threatening food allergy. So you can see some more of these anomalies. So I think the anomalies are really interesting. And here's why. In 1962, there was a physicist, like sort of a philosopher of science as well, by the name of Thomas Kuhn, and he wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And what he talked about in this book was how anomalies are sort of a harbinger of a coming paradigm shift, or they can be a harbinger of a coming paradigm shift. And he talked about in the context of scientific revolutions, like Einstein's findings forever moved us into the quantum world as an example of a scientific paradigm shift. And what Kuhn said was that when normal science, which means sort of the prevailing scientific paradigm, can no longer explain away the anomalies, and somebody else can, that's when things shift. That's when you have a paradigm shift, and the old scientific paradigm is replaced by the new scientific paradigm. And you know what? I think that's what's happening right now, today. I think these kids are shifting the paradigm for us, right? Because you can't explain why these kids are getting better and 99% of other kids aren't. And we're trying to explain them away. Medical science is trying to put them in a box, like, well, it's just an anomaly, right? So what do we do about this? This gets back to Documenting Hope, which is a very concerted effort to accelerate this paradigm shift, to do everything we can to pay attention to these anomalies and study them and understand them and make that new knowledge mainstream and available to everyone. Because we think these anomalies have a lot to tell us. There's a lot to be learned by studying this phenomenon of healing. So for the last few years, we've had a team of researchers and physicians who have been trying to work on this problem, right? So when you have a problem like this, you take all these anomalies and you line them up and you say, all right, well, what do all these anomalies have in common? Where do we start? How do we start analyzing this situation? Okay? So if you take those stories like those ones I shared with you or some of the others we have on the website, what do they have in common? Well, here's what happened with these families, okay? And this is a generalization, and this isn't true for every family, but it's kind of the pattern you begin to see. So what did these families do? They increased supports and decreased stressors and gave bio-individual therapeutics based on an individual child's needs. So what do I mean by increased supports? It can kind of be boiled down to, if you want to simplify it, embrace nature. Sounds really awesome, doesn't it? It's like really simple. It's not really that simple. But what I mean by that is that these families started doing things that were more in rhythm and harmony with nature. They started doing more natural things. So that means eating nutrient-dense whole foods, right? It means working on that microbiome diversity. Do you know how you make your microbiome more diverse? There's lots of ways to do it. One of the best ways is to eat a lot of fiber. And I'm not talking about your whole grain wheat bread fiber. I'm talking about vegetables, plants. Go out in the woods and forage a little. Have lots of diversity of different kinds of microbes. Natural rhythms, by that I mean like waking up with the sun and going to bed when it's dark out, and getting sleep. Sleep is a massively important health support that our society has totally kicked to the curb. We're like, we've got lights and computers and blue lights and we can stay up all night, it's fine, we don't need sleep. But that's when your body detoxifies. That's when your children grow, right? So really emphasizing sleep and getting outdoor exposure, going in the natural sunlight without sunscreen. These are the kinds of things that these families started to do. And one thing I'll just mention, which I think is so important, and I actually didn't realize this one until I'd been sort of documenting these stories for a number of years, is that probably one of the most important features of all these families was mindset. They believed it could happen. I have one colleague and friend who's recovered her son from autism who just talks about him as if he's already recovered. From day one, she talked about him as if he was already recovered. That was her mindset, believing in the possibility. And some of the things that they did on the decreasing stressors are very easy no-brainers, right? You take out anything that's new to nature, which is a term that's used by Jeff Bland, the Institute of Functional Medicine. They talk about this a lot, that like all of these things that are new to nature are probably not that awesome for our bodies. So that's anything that's a chemical toxin, like heavy metal, medications, anything that's patentable. If you think about that for a second, pharmaceuticals, you get a patent because you take something that's natural and in a lab you tweak it so that it's not natural anymore and then therefore patentable, right? So pharmaceutical medications by their nature are foreign to the human body. So there's going to be consequences for using them. Getting rid of artificial light, getting rid of those fluorescent light bulbs in the home, reducing EMF exposure, turning off Wi-Fi, for instance, hardwiring homes. These are real things that people did, and the list goes on. And the last thing I'll say about what is common amongst all these anomalies is this idea of giving children bio-individual therapies based on their own particular needs. There is no one-size-fits-all anything in this. It's about what you're doing in your life today and what are you going to do differently tomorrow. So same thing goes to different kinds of therapies that kids need. So in autism in particular, you have kids who have arrested or stalled or delayed development. They didn't talk. They didn't crawl. They never walked on time. Whatever their stalled development was, this was because the total load on their body was too great. Right? They might have had something that interrupted their development. So as a human being, if you're supposed to crawl at 10 months, what you're doing by crawling, that movement, is actually wiring your brain to talk, for the two hemispheres to talk. So if you skipped that because your brain was too busy dealing with toxins and allergens and inflammation when you were 10 months old, you can go back and do it again. So there's actually a therapy where you can crawl and actually rewire the brain and deal with some of those stalled, arrested, or delayed developmental issues that you might see in autism. So that's what I mean by this other kind of box down here of bio-individual therapies. So decreasing supports, increasing stressors, flip that around. Decreasing stressors, increasing supports. It makes sense, right? It just makes sense. And we need to be thinking about how we can live more naturally, right? How can we address that mismatched biology issue, okay? So it seems simple, right? Like it seems like, wow, I'm just gonna do everything natural and we're all gonna be healthy, it's gonna be great. Seems easy, but it's not. And why? Can you guys see, I don't know if you can see this, if anybody recognizes who that is in the picture there? It's Jack Nicholson in The Shining, right? Did you guys all see The Shining? He's crazy in that movie. So that's what I'm trying to depict here. I mean, this is pretty much me sitting down and having coffee with like any of my friends. They think I'm cray-cray because I'm not putting sunscreen on my kids, or because I'm fermenting my own sauerkraut, or doing things that people have done for thousands of years. It didn't used to be crazy, it used to be what you did, but in modern American culture, it seems so counterculture to live in natural ways. So it's a little bit of this tension that we might feel when we try to do these things that are more natural, where we feel like the outlier. We feel like the crazy ones, right? I'll ask you this. Are we really the crazy ones? to be thinking that natural is the way we need to go? Are we really that crazy? I mean, that's what people said about him, right? And what was he responsible for? Shifting a scientific paradigm. And we are too. But the problem is, it's not happening fast enough for my comfort level, because we have an entire generation of kids that need our help today, and they do not have time to wait. So here's my proposition. Science to the rescue! Because science is awesome, but they're doing it the wrong way right now. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can do things using science, but maybe a little differently. So I would like to first give credit to science. Science is so awesome because it got us to this point where we understand all of these things in and around us that are toxic and that are contributing to this new childhood epidemic. Science did that. I mean, you can get into the medical literature. There is so much great science out there that points to all the things I'm talking about right now. So this is an example. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Dr. Phil Landrigan. He's a pediatrician. He spent his entire career dedicated to children's environmental health. And he was one of the primary researchers behind getting lead out of gasoline and consumer products. So because this guy, this scientist, took his career and dedicated it to getting the lead out, we have a whole lot less lead in and around us. Now, we totally still have a lead problem, as Flint, Michigan would attest to, and many other municipalities, and it's everywhere still. But doing this rigorous, detailed science on one molecule was really important, and it got us to a great place today. And this kind of science has been done for not just lead, but for so many different things, not just singular chemical molecules or toxic molecules. This kind of science has been out there. For instance, evaluating whether cell phone radiation is dangerous to us. We could probably use a little bit more science in that, but that's been done. You can look, I don't know if you can even read this stuff, but like pretty much everything on this list has been demonstrated by science to be negatively impacting human health in some form, some capacity, okay? So it's not so much that we need more science, because there's a whole lot of science out there, right? This is just some of the literature, I did this for effect, that is out there that is linking the environmental exposures and our daily choices to bad health outcomes. Like, there's tons of it out there. I'm kind of a little bit of a medical literature nerd. I'm totally not trained to read it, but I love reading it anyway. There's tons of it out there, okay? So we don't really need more of that kind of science. We do need a different kind of science, though, a different way of solving this problem, and here's why. I don't know if you've ever seen this. This is the Chemical Abstracts Registry. And what this is a documentation of every new molecule we smart human beings create. It's pretty cool. Look at this rate of innovation. We are so smart. We are creating new stuff all the time. In fact, over the 100 million substances in the CAS registry, approximately 75 million were added over the past 10 years. On average, the CAS has registered one substance every 2.5 minutes over the past 50 years. This is all of the stuff that's new to nature. Isn't that amazing? We're so good at coming up with new stuff. Is it safe and healthy? No idea. No idea. Are we going to release it into the marketplace without properly testing it? You bet we are, because that's what we do. So somebody like Phil Landrigan is going to come down and say, all right, well, I'm going to take this one molecule, I'm going to study it to make sure it's safe and healthy for our kids. It's going to take me 20 years, and at the end of 20 years, I'm going to say, take it off the market. Okay? But the problem with doing science like this is that we are never going to catch up. And not only that, but we do this funny thing. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but do you remember BPA? There was like this big scare about BPA. BPA is bisphenol A. It's an endocrine disrupting chemical, a plasticizer. You find it in baby bottles. You find it in toys. You find it in the lining of cans, like canned beans or canned tomatoes. BPA is a bad dude. And we found this out through science. And we found out that it had some endocrine disrupting properties. So it took the scientists a number of years to figure this out and to get into the public awareness and to get it pulled out of products. Yes, we got rid of BPA, awesome. But guess what we did? We replaced it with BPS, a sister of BPA that was worse. But we could say on our products, BPA free. Okay, and now we're having these BPA and BPS free, and I don't know what they've replaced it with now. So my point is that it's one in, one out, right? We just have this treadmill. And like I was saying before, if you think about we've got this rate of innovation where we're creating all this new stuff, but for us to study it using the proper scientific method to really understand rigorously what's going on when it interacts with the human body, it's a 17-year life cycle a 17-year stretch of time between when we understand what that molecule is doing, when we have scientific evidence, and when that actually makes it into practice. Okay, so that's called kind of the bench to bedside idea of how long it takes before these things make it into practice. If you think about our kids who are born today, that's their life. That's from baby to adulthood. So it's important to study one thing at a time. We can't stop doing that. But with the rate of innovation, we have to do more because we will never get ahead of this. It's such a old way of thinking about this problem. So what we need to do is shift our mind from thinking about one molecule and one health outcome, right? And start thinking about total load and how the total load of multiple variables impact a complex system like a human being. I put a little canary here because that's our sign. Our kids are canaries in the coal mine, right? So if you have a human being, which is a completely complex system, and you have 50,000 things that are in and around that complex system, you are never going to be able to understand why that system's breaking down by studying one thing at a time. So we need to shift how we think about this and think about how we can study total load. So if you have a complex system, how are you going to study this? How are you going to understand how that total load is impacting the system? That is why we developed the Documenting Hope project, is to tackle this problem and answer this question. How are we going to study at total load and its impact on our children's health? So this project has several features to it. We have a research program that has two main research studies. The first study is a study called CHIRP. You'll note the clever play on words with the birds. CHIRP stands for Child Health Inventory for Resilience and Prevention. And essentially what this is measuring total load. So how do we even know what our kids are dealing with? Well, we're going to measure it, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. That study is IRB approved and underway. The second study is called FLIGHT. It's a very long acronym that stands for Facilitated Longitudinal Intensive Investigation of Genuine Health Transformation, which is a long way of saying we're going to actually see what happens when you reduce a child's total load. What happens if you take a child who has autism or an autoimmune disease and you reduce their total load? And that's what the second study is. Both of these studies are under the direction of Dr. Martha Herbert. She's a pediatric neurologist and neuroscientist affiliated with Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a flyby each of these studies. So the CHIRP study, like I said, it is IRB approved. It is enrolling participants right now. And what it is an online survey. It's HIPAA compliant, it's private, it's secure, names are taken off, identifying information is taken off. And it's for parents of children ages 1 to 15. So basically go online and you fill out a survey. And we ask you every question you could possibly imagine. It is the most comprehensive inventory of modern living ever created. I sound like Trump a little bit, like, ask anyone, it's the best ever. But this is Seriously, I'm not kidding. I've looked out there for inventories. Who's taking an inventory of what is going on in modern life? No one's doing it. No one's asking this question. So it is over 900 questions long. We consulted over 40 experts in different disciplines, from endocrinology to traditional Chinese medicine to nutrition to toxicology. You name it, we tried to get as many people collaborating on this as possible. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all this data and try and analyze it, not just for correlations like does BPA contribute to asthma or whatever it is, but to look for the total load, to actually go ahead and measure what it looks like for a child to have a very heavy load of environmental exposures, a heavy load of stressors, and not enough health support. And really get an understanding of how that impacts their health, how it impacts symptoms and diagnoses. So right now we have over 360 participants who are in process of taking this survey. We're trying to get to 1,000 minimum. I would love to have 10,000 or 100,000. But this is really citizen scientist. I don't come from a big academic institution with a big budget. We are doing this by people like you getting involved and taking the survey yourself, or if you're a grandparent or an aunt or uncle, giving it to your nearest parent that you know that could take this. So we are recruiting right now. I have a bunch of postcards out on the table out there. Please come and get some postcards. If you know a parent that would be willing to take it, give this to them. There are some perks and benefits because if you participate in this, because we don't just want to do the research, we want to help parents. That is our primary motivation, is to help these kids get better. So when you participate in the CHIRP survey, what you get is a personalized report. You get a PDF that you can download at the end of your survey. And basically, I have an example here, and you can come take a look at it out on my table. And it's a report you can print out. I don't know if you can see this, but there's some things that are highlighted in orange. So anything that in your child's life that might be considered a stressor, as documented in the medical literature, is highlighted in orange. So if you're a parent who's like, I have no idea what in and around my child might be harmful to them, because you live in this culture, we just don't have that awareness. This is meant to be a blueprint or a roadmap for you to follow so you can start to identify. And you know what's great is you can take this report and go find a functional medicine practitioner or a naturopath or somebody who does integrative medicine, and they can walk you through this and help you interpret and analyze this. And we actually have some health coaches on the Epidemic Answers website that can do that too.
How long does it take to fill out?
So it's a great question. Brace yourself. It takes between 2 hours, and the longest it's taken anyone so far is 6. Between 2 and 6 hours. But the thing is, you get a login and a password, and you go in and out. You can do it half an hour. We recommend you do it for like 45 minutes over a couple of days. Just bang it out, get it done, and say, I contributed. We actually are asking people to think of this as a volunteer opportunity. So instead of going to ASPCA or Habitat for Humanity this weekend, you sit down at that computer, fill it out, get up, and then move around so Katie doesn't get mad. But it does take some time. What's that? No, this must be done by parents. So if we collect the data, what is it going to say? This is the really exciting part. We just hired a data analyst, and we've been digging in the data already. And you guys would be amazed at what we're finding already. All this stuff I'm talking about total load, it's starting to present itself. So we're going to ask the database all kinds of questions. So like, does a heavier total load result in negative health outcomes? What impact do supports make? So if your child gets really good sleep and eats nutritious food and gets outside, do those things matter, right? Has anyone really looked at that in a comprehensive way? And we can look at the health outcomes, for instance, of kids who've had medical interventions like antibiotics in the first year of life. Does that make a difference between kids who haven't had antibiotics in the first year of life? Those are the kinds of questions we can query the database on. So I would ask you all, if you had a question that you wanted to know based on the CHIRP data, what would you ask? What's pressing and burning in your mind? Think about it. What you can ask anything about modern living, and this database will feed that to you.
You haven't really said
You can ask the database that, can't you? So if you have a question, that's something that you think you would like to ask the database, tell me, I will write it down. I will feed that back to my data analyst.
What do you mean when you say that? Do you mean like we can go and look at the data that's coming in?
You-
Or do you mean you would put the question on the...
Meaning the sky is the limit in terms of what the data can tell us, because it's over 900 questions. So let's say, for instance, I just moved to North Carolina just a couple months ago. And when I got to North Carolina, I learned that coal ash is a major problem in North Carolina. I had never come across the environmental problems caused by coal ash. But I live in an area where there are cancer clusters all over the place because of coal ash. So you can take, I've asked those people in that community to fill out the survey, kind of like a la Aaron Brockovich, and document your story. You've been poisoned by the coal ash, put it in the database. And then we can compare your stories to people who aren't exposed to coal ash. Do you see what I mean?
Coal ash from burning coal.
Correct, correct. And there are places where it's been used as landfill, and then houses have been built on it. Just think about all of the, that Aaron Brockovich movie, or you think about the situation in Massachusetts with the, I forget the name of that book and that movie, but there was, so many Superfund sites out there where people's health has been impacted. This is going on all over the country. So this is an opportunity for us to capture that data and to tell that story.
So,
Yeah.
So you want participants that may or may not have health issues or concerns?
Exactly. So our goal is to get as many different kinds of participants as possible across age, across gender, across socioeconomic status, healthy kids, unhealthy kids, kids who've never had a pharmaceutical in their life, kids who have had a gazillion pharmaceuticals, kids who live near coal ash, kids who don't. As much data as we can get, we're going to get a more robust picture of what's causing our kids to be so sick today and what we can do to help them.
You're dealing with Harvard Medical School, a very large allopathic institution. How do they even recognize what we're talking about here as being low toxic?
It's a great question. Our principal investigator is no longer a part of Harvard Medical School. So it's not our institution. So we don't have to worry about it. We have this is independent research. It's sponsored by Epidemic Answers, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are totally funded by private family foundations, donors, grants. In fact, the Latner Foundation is why we've gotten as far as we have. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you made a connection to toxic load in Lyme disease yet?
Lyme disease is something we're definitely looking to capture more information about and we actually have some preliminary participants who have some Lyme data for us. So if anybody has been impacted by Lyme disease, we definitely want that kind of participation. We ask all the questions right down to, did you have Borrelia, babesiosis, ehrlichiosis? I'm telling you, 900 questions, we got it. Yeah.
I'll also write to you, Aaron, from vermontlyme.org, but your slide deck could actually mirror one of the decks that we have, but it all comes back to the load. And in terms of treatment options, we look at whether people have gone strictly antibiotic or combination. The best outcomes, and this is my assessment, living through this world with 2 kids and myself, is that if you work on the load and you work on the toxins, your body will heal itself. It takes a while. It's not cheap. It's the horrific part of it. But it mirrors this.
I'm glad to hear that. And also, another fun fact about the CHIRP survey is we actually are collecting information about treatments. So if you used a certain detoxification modality or you used a particular physical therapy or whatever you did on your healing journey, we ask you questions about that because we're documenting that too, because that's important. So this is just some slides that I'm showing you here of the types of things that we're querying the database for right now. So for instance, environmental exposure A, which I'm not going to tell you what it is, but immune-related symptoms on the left, we're looking at a correlation here, right? These are the kinds of things we're seeing in our very first cut of data. Like literally it's just the very beginning. And again, this is a numbers game. We need as many people to participate as possible. Here's another kind of thing we're looking at is comparing mothers who took reflux medications, the PPIs I was talking about before, during pregnancy, and the rates of autism in their children. So this is like an example of a thing that we might query the database for. We're capturing allergies. Are our kids actually more allergic to their environment than we thought? You know, is it just the top 10 that we hear about, shellfish, peanuts, almonds, wheat, dairy? It's a lot more. And we're finding that out by asking the questions. So basically what we need is for you to participate and to go in your community and get your friends to participate. My favorite way of doing this is asking a parent who has a child between 1 and 15, who has, let's say, a sick child. Let's say your child has some kind of chronic condition. You go and fill it out, and then you go get an age and sex control, somebody who is just like your son or just like your daughter, but who doesn't have that diagnosis. You know, we want to get people to not just do it themselves, but to get active in their community and to bring in as many of their friends and family members as we can. This is really just quickly what, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this, but this is a mom.
My name is Adil. I'm a researcher with more than 20 years of professional experience. I'm also an autism mom. And I sincerely believe we can solve for childhood epidemics such as ASD, ADD, ADHD, among others, with the right kind of data and analyses. With this study, we can connect the dots between biology, family history, environment, among many other factors. This is just the right kind of robust data collection we need to answer questions about the medical and behavioral challenges our children are experiencing. Please consider giving a bit of your time to this online survey, which you can take in your own time, your own place, at your own pace.
So there are tons of really motivated moms out there who are doing this because they want their story told, but we need people who are less motivated too, so if you can work that out. If you participate, there are some incentives. You know, we have Naturepedic as a partner, and they're providing 20% off of their organic mattresses, $350 off of water filters. We have all kinds of incentives. When you finish the survey, you get access to these kinds of things. So that's the CHIRP survey. You can ask me more questions about it. I just want to tell you very briefly about the follow-on project. So once we've taken an inventory of total load and we're demonstrating that kids' health is in fact impacted by the total load, our follow-on story is, well, what happens if you reduce the total load? If you decrease the stressors and increase supports? So we're doing a longitudinal prospective study that looks at that, and that's what flight is. So we actually are trying to test this theory. Are we gonna have optimal health outcomes if we do this kind of reduction of total load and give this child bio-individual support? So what we'll be doing is taking a small group of children through a pilot program. It's going to last 18 months long. We'll basically start them out as green as possible, meaning that they just live standard American life. They haven't really done any kind of interventions, but they have a diagnosis. Could be autism, could be an autoimmune disease, could be ADHD. And we're basically bringing them through this journey where we will be giving them organic food, we will giving them detoxifying their home, we'll be giving them we'll be paying for their health care with an integrative practitioner and a series of other specialists if they need them, and we'll be tracking them over 18 months and taking measurements, things that you can measure in blood, urine, stool, looking for markers of inflammation, looking for markers of oxidative stress, looking for nutrient status, and does your nutrient status change when you eat a healthy diet? When you work on the microbiome, what happens to your immune system? These are the kinds of questions that we're going to be asking. So this study is being prepared for IRB review. We're very close to submitting our protocol. It should be happening any day now, and then we will hopefully, upon approval, be able to start enrolling participants. Our first location is going to be in Northern Virginia, where we'll be taking 3 to 4 participants. And then after that is going, we will phase in additional participants in a second site. So that is the plan for the flight study. And what I'd like to do is just show a very brief video that sort of, I think, encapsulates the flight study and what we're trying to do through Documenting Hope.
The government says autism is showing up in children more than before.
1 in 50 school children has a form of autism.
Asthma rates rising dramatically over the past decade.
More than 1 in 7 children in the U.S. receiving a diagnosis of ADHD.
Numbers from the CDC have steadily increased in the past decade.
In the last 30 years, obesity rates for kids have tripled.
Frightening to parents to hear those dramatic numbers.
It may reduce the life expectancy of this generation of children and diminish their quality of life.
Our kids are sick. They're screaming out. They want help.
He still didn't have a single word. He was drooling. He was rubbing his head against the carpet. He was pushing himself into walls.
His eyes swelled shut. He was covered with hives from head to foot.
Probably around 14, 15 months, all that language disappeared.
From all that I can see, it looks like we've got a child here with pervasive developmental delay.
Noah, you keep holding your stomach. Does your side hurt?
Having a child with autism, it's not what you envision.
Unfortunately today, too many of our children, by analogy, function as canaries in the coal mine. They are teaching us that something is deeply out of order, deeply imbalanced, deeply in need of understanding, and largely lacking in therapy.
I think the first step to transforming this problem is to understand it. And we have not done a great job at that in healthcare.
We know that when our bodies are hit with toxins, it interferes with our biochemistry. They are not prepared for handling the 85,000 toxic chemicals on the market.
Whatever is lacking of essential nutrients that the body cannot make is going to control that whole system of cellular biology.
The brain is a physical organ of the body, and its health depends on the health of the cells. And when we address the body problems, the brain problems start to resolve.
What's wrong? Most of the pediatricians I went to see basically told me there was no chance for recovery.
Your son was just born with this, and it would be best for you and your husband to just accept your new normal.
I knew Ben was going to get better the day I got the diagnosis. He's not going to get better. No, I'm not really hearing that.
When you tell a person that there's no hope, that their child will always be this way, that there's nothing you can do about it, that's not science. That's a misuse of statistics.
The doctor said, no, your boy will have autism for a very long time, but my mother didn't give up. She kept on thinking of ways to try and get rid of autism.
There's an abundance of intriguing individual cases, or what we call anecdotes. They cry out to be better studied and documented.
So to think that just a few short years ago, he had to be in a room with an air purifier plugged in to his nebulizer, flash forward to now, and he loves to hike and he loves to be outside. He couldn't do that a couple years ago.
People say kids can't recover. Well, they do recover. I've seen it. I've seen kids recover from autism, from ADHD, from Tourette's. I've seen it.
I feel like his true personality is coming through again. He has so many friends. He's got more best friends than I can count.
When he's doing BMX at the track and I'm sitting there watching him, come on, go, go! I just know that there's no limits to what he can do.
If we do the science deeply, we will be able to document in ways that cannot be dismissed what many of us think we've been observing anecdotally, which is the improvements in these children.
This is one of the most important public health and scientific issues. We need to figure out how these people get better and reverse engineer it so we can do it for everyone.
Research has been largely fragmented across different communities and in different silos.
And I agree with our colleagues. There is no sufficiently documented comprehensive study that has thus far been executed. That's part of the fierce urgency for now.
We've been trained to believe that these illnesses are genetic and inborn and we need some kind of scientific miracle. That's not what we need right now. We need a fundamental rethinking on the optimization of our health and the minimization of threats to our health.
As we blaze this trail, others can learn as we have that it is possible to look at the individual, to remove obstacles to recovery, to evoke healing responses, and to do that in a way that is both very personal and rigorously scientific.
We're losing a generation of children. That's what's at stake.
If we project the current trends forward just half a century, everyone will be in a hospital bed taking care of the person next to them. We cannot continue on the current trajectory, and yet it shows no signs of abating.
Clearly there's something going on and there's something wrong when I can walk into a room of 20 kids and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's at least one EpiPen in that room.
The economic cost is astronomical to our society, and the societal costs alone are tremendous.
Something is hurting our children. And pretty soon it's going to be 1 and 2. And then what? Then are we going to look at the issue?
The time is now for the scientific community to take recovery, environment, and nutrition seriously. Our future depends on it.
We need to start talking about our children's health.
The first day that I dropped him off and I picked him up and I put him in the car and I was like, did you have a great day at school? He's like, oh, I had a great day at school. And I was like, I am so proud of you, Connor. And from the back seat I hear, oh, I'm so proud of you too, Mom. I'm like, no, I'm proud of you. And no, I'm proud of you. I won. And I'm here. The reason why I'm doing this is I'm here to tell other parents, like, you can win too.
So one of the things I neglected to tell you is that those children that are participating in the flight study, our intention is to film their recoveries so that we can not just do the science and have it go in some obscure publication or in some filing cabinet, but so we can share these inspiring stories of hope and recovery with the public. So all of this work is underway, and as I mentioned before, we are a privately funded operation, and we need more help and more support. So if you want to leave here today and take the CHIRP survey, consider that your donation to Epidemic Answers and the Documenting Hope Project. If you know of anybody that is interested in continuing to fund this research, please do come see me, because we have it partially funded and not all the way, and we want to be able to take all of these kids through the study. The last thing I'll say is that please do try and keep in touch with us. You can reach us on, you can get a newsletter from us by going to documentinghope.com and or epidemicanswers.org, where we will send notifications, as the flight study opens enrollment, for instance. You want to be notified of that. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, even though I highly suggest you put your phone down right after and not spend too much time following us on Facebook. I also wanted to mention, please do go take a card, a recruitment card. There's many of them out there. Take a dozen of them, take a bunch. If you think you can get people to participate in your community, contact me and I'll set you up in a library and give you some information and recruitment materials. Finally, stick one of these on your card, also out there on your car. Also on the desk, and this basically just is an acknowledgement that you understand that our kids are the canary in the coal mine, and you are going to do something about it, and you are going to be a child health advocate, and you're going to participate in the solution. And finally, also Epidemic Answers has a new book out called Brain Under Attack, and it's about the epidemic of PANS and PANDAS and autoimmune encephalitis, which is a relatively new diagnosis that's hitting neurotypical kids, as well as kids on the autism spectrum, and it's basically their brains are inflamed due to an autoimmune condition. These books are for sale, and the proceeds go to Epidemic Answers. So with that, I know it's probably running past time, but does anyone have any questions? It's a great question. She asked, have I spoken to the children who have recovered and found out what it was like for them when they had autism? And the answer to that is yes, and here's a couple examples. I'm going to get really emotional thinking about one particular example, but that the story of Aiden, he will tell you that he remembers what it was like to be nonverbal. And he remembers the sensory overload that he used to feel, and he articulates it. And what he will say is that he will always have autism in the sense that he always remembers what it was like. And it changed him going through that experience, but it doesn't limit him as an adult recovered the way it limited him as a child. So that's, those kinds of experiences I hear about. The other thing that is so moving to me is that in the last couple of years I've learned about different technologies people are using to help kids with autism speak, who cannot speak. They used like talking boards, different ways of typing, so that they can actually articulate. And you will not believe what these kids are saying. Mommy, I've been here the whole time. I hear everything you say. It hurts my feelings when you say that I can't, that I can't understand what's going on. They are like college level readers who cannot articulate themselves sometimes. So there is this element of, there's a woman named Julie Sandor who works with kids with autism, teaching them how to talk using assistive devices. They're there. They may seem like they're retreating in their own world. They may not be communicating with you, but they are there. And so these assistive devices, until they get language, are extremely important, because it's so important that that you see them, that they are acknowledged, and that they are heard. So I have many more stories like that, but that hopefully answers your question. It's a great question. She asked if we have a curriculum for kids, designed for kids, and right now we do not. But I think that would be a place we would like to go in the future. What we do actually have is, I don't have a card here, but on my table, we have a curriculum for adults. It's a training program that's designed for health coaches, so people who are already working on like weight loss and nutrition, who get that piece but don't understand the developmental issues with kids. So we have an online training program that anyone can take. And a lot of parents have taken it and had a great benefit from it in terms of learning what they can do to help their kids get better. But we don't have a program for children right now, but hopefully with more funding we could do something like that. That would be amazing. Yeah.
Why is the survey, the age range, age 1 to 15, and it doesn't go up to like 8?
So the age range, the question was, why is the age range 1 to 15? We set that range because 1 is when you can really start, I think, beginning to see symptoms, and we wanted to do a cutoff there. And then 15 is an age where the older children need to assent. So they need to give their permission. So we had to do a cutoff so that the parents can still legally assent on behalf of their children. So, yeah. Great question. So for the CHIRP study, the geographic range is the entirety of the US. It's not yet available in Canada, although many people have been asking us to do that. We also have been asked to translate it into Spanish, and we just don't have the funds to do that right now. But I would, if anybody wants to do that for me, I have a job for you. It is the only place right now you cannot take it is if you live in Northern Virginia. And the reason why is because in Northern Virginia is our first site for flight. And we want the people that we recruit for flight to have not taken the CHIRP survey until we're ready to recruit them. So we will open enrollment in Northern Virginia this year as soon as we're ready to enroll for flight. So it's the US, anywhere in the US you can take the survey. Yeah.
The video that we just watched, is that available to be seen by others?
Yes, if you go to, there's a couple places. The question is the video available that we just watched? If you go to documentinghope.com, scroll down on the first homepage, you can see the video. You can also go to YouTube and just type in Documenting Hope and you'll see that video there as well. Yes?
Beth was trying to recruit people to take this survey, which is very important. And I want to remind people that not only can you take actions to not use pesticides and reduce your stressors, but there are community level actions you can take. You can ask businesses to be pesticide free. You can ask your county or your school to pass a pesticide free CHIRP ordinance or a pesticide free building ordinance. So that there are these community level actions that we can take, even while action is not happening at the federal or international level.
Yep, thank you very much. Yep, there's no question that we have to do this work, you guys, because the government just cut off funding for all this kind of work. So we got to do it. It's up to us. We can do it. Come on. Yeah.
How does this tie in with what Natasha Campbell McBride might be talking about at all, Weston A. Price?
So, interesting question. He asked, how does this tie in with what Natasha Campbell McBride and Weston Price might be talking about? We actually ask a lot of questions in the CHIRP survey about Weston Price Diets. We ask, do you eat cod liver oil? Do you use real butter? We ask a lot of questions that inform about the microbiome, which is Natasha Campbell McBride's GAPS diet. We ask, have you done the GAPS diet? Have you done the body ecology diet? So it's gathering information about those kinds of approaches. So hopefully that will be helpful. Yeah. Yes, the question was, do we ask about mothers' health and lifestyle choices during pregnancy? Yes, we ask questions about mom and dad, preconception, prenatally, and now. Like, what's mom's stress level right now? Because guess what? Mom's stress level impacts the kids. It really does. I learned that firsthand. Any other questions? I will be around the next 2 days, so feel free to come see me. Thank you.